And so generally the rule of thumb is if your client is showing agitation, you're going to decrease the reward frequency. So you're going to start rewarding a slower frequency to help them slow down. If the person is getting too slow, then often you want to increase the reward frequency to help them activate a little bit more. Does that make sense? It isn't always the case. Sometimes if the person is ending up feeling kind of sluggish, it's because you haven't gone low enough. So it's a little bit tricky, and it's not the ideal way of practicing as far as I'm concerned. Would be the nice thing about everybody having a 19-channel EEG is that you wouldn't have to use those kinds of tools. You'd have more objective measures to make your determination. There is often a discussion in the field about whether you can train a person on medication or if they have to be off medication to train them. And my experience is that you don't have to have them be off their medication. In fact, in many cases, it's not desirable to have them off medication. For example, an ADHD child that's on stimulant medication, and that is helpful to the child, but maybe they're having some side effects, they're having difficulty sleeping, or their appetite is suppressed or something, and their parents want to try an alternative. It's nice to let them stay on the medication because it's a benefit for them, and then as they develop the skill of being alert and focused without the medication, then it's sort of a natural process of weaning them off. People in the neurofeedback field don't do any peripheral biofeedback or general biofeedback, and I think that's a big mistake because it's a very powerful intervention to teach people how to breathe correctly. And I'll often send people home with a training device like a respirator or something like that. So that they can practice and get the idea of how to do this correctly. And only after all of that do we go to EEG, and I show them the EEG patterns. And then that's an opportunity for me to explain the different frequency bands and what they represent and how they relate to them, and then we can kind of take a look at it and see if they've got too much of this and too little of that. And we do the eyes closed and eyes open. And that's the end of the evaluation. So that takes about an hour and a half. So what is the quantitative EEG? Well, originally, of course, we had pen tracings on paper. And the only person who could really understand what those squiggly lines meant were neurologists who spent years and years and years looking at that and developing their pattern matching skills. Because that's what it is, it's this pattern matching ability. And we have that ability, but boy, you really have to train it to understand what those squiggly lines mean. So for the rest of us who don't have 10 or 15 years to learn those patterns, people started using the computer power that we had at the time. They put the cap on the forehead, pull it back over the back of the head, attach it to the belt to hold it down nice and tight. Now he's injecting that gel into those sensor housings and filling up that little gap between the scalp and the metal disc. And then if you don't get good impedance, he's looking at an impedance meter. You take a wooden Q-tip stick and put it in there and scratch the surface of the scalp. It's not a particularly pleasant experience. That's one of the reasons why I don't use caps anymore. Why I use individually applied sensors. Because if you've got a bad sensor, you just pull it up, rub a little new prep on it, stick it back down, and you're okay, ready to go. The faster the sampling rate, the faster the frequency that can be seen in your data. There's something called the Nyquist principle that you'll have to know for the test. And the Nyquist principle says that the minimal sampling rate is twice the frequency that you want to resolve. Lots of different ways of looking at the data and comparing various electrode sites to each other, and we'll do that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We'll do that when we do our lab. Here's a delta band, 1 to 3.5 hertz. If we break this down into the different 1 hertz frequency bins for delta, we can see that most of the problem that looks like it's widely distributed here is really in the 1 hertz frequency bin. And what would that tell you? What kind of an artifact would cause a 1 hertz heartbeat artifact? Yes, this was a heartbeat artifact. So, why use a quantitative EEG? Well, in addition to history, or along with history, it can help you determine if the client is head injured or not, dyslexic or not, bipolar versus monopolar depression, the area for epilepsy, neurosurgery, locations, medication outcome measures. There's a database that's specifically for predicting medication output or outcome. And of course, for our purposes, to guide neurofeedback training.